There's a specific kind of silence that follows a text message you weren't expecting. Not the comfortable kind, not the peaceful kind, the kind that makes the air around you feel suddenly thinner, like the room forgot how to hold oxygen for a second. That was the silence I sat in the night I read what my brother sent me. I need to back up. My name is Stella. I'm 31 years old. I have a good job, a small apartment that I've made into something I'm genuinely proud of, and I've spent the better part of a decade being the person my family called when things fell apart. Not because anyone asked me officially. Not because there was a meeting where they handed me the role. It just happened the way water finds cracks, gradually, quietly, and then all at once. My brother is 27. His name is Oliver. We grew up in a house in Ohio where money was always a little tight and tension was always a little looser than it should have been. My parents. I'll call them Mom and Dad because that's honestly how I think of them, even now. They weren't cruel. They were just the kind of people who moved through the world with their eyes half closed to certain things. Particularly when it came to Oliver. He was the baby. He was funny and charming, and when he smiled at my mother a certain way, her whole face rearranged itself. I noticed that when I was about 9 years old, I filed it somewhere and didn't take it out again for a long time. I got a scholarship for college. Partial, not full. I worked 22 hours a week at a campus coffee shop and graduated with a degree in accounting and about $12,000 in debt I paid off by myself inside 3 years. I moved to Chicago. I built a life. I was proud of it in the quiet way you're proud of things you actually built with your own hands. Oliver didn't get a scholarship. He got something better. He got me. When he wanted to go to a state school for business, I helped with the gap his financial aid didn't cover. About $8,400 over 2 years. I told myself it was an investment in my brother. He was smart. He had potential. He just needed a little runway. When he graduated and moved to Nashville to chase a vague idea about starting a company, I helped him cover first and last month's rent. $3,200. He thanked me with a voice memo that lasted 47 seconds. When the company didn't work out and he pivoted to working at a marketing firm, I helped him with a car payment when his engine blew. $1,900. He sent me a gif of a dog saying thank you. I saved it for a while and then deleted it during a particularly honest afternoon. The car. The school. The small emergencies that bled into not-so-small ones. I kept a note in my phone, just for myself, not to hold over anyone. Just because I wanted to know. The number when I finally added it up was $47,300. That was 3 years ago. The number is higher now. I want to be clear about something. I never gave any of that money expecting it back. I gave it because he was my brother and I loved him, and when someone you love needs help and you have the ability to help, you do it. That's how I was built. I don't know if that's admirable or foolish. Probably some of both. The thing that changed everything wasn't the money. It was Kelsey. Oliver met Kelsey about 2 years ago at a work event. She's beautiful, genuinely, and she has a personality that fills every room she walks into. I liked her the first time I met her. I liked the way she looked at my brother like he was someone worth looking at. He seemed happier. He stood up straighter. They got engaged 14 months ago at a rooftop restaurant in Nashville. Oliver called me from the car on the way home, his voice shaking in that way voices shake when good things happen. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and cried a little while he talked, the good kind of crying, the kind you do when someone you love gets something they deserve. They asked me to be in the wedding party. Oliver asked, specifically, on a Sunday afternoon call. He said Kelsey wanted it too. He said I was going to be the only one from his side. I said yes before he finished the sentence. What happened over the next several months is the kind of thing that sounds petty when you describe it out loud, but is actually a slow, steady pressure applied to a very specific point. Kelsey had opinions about the wedding. This is not unreasonable. It was her wedding, but the opinions kept landing, softly at first, on me. She wanted a dress that wasn't quite the style I'd mentioned. Fine. She wanted the rehearsal dinner to be on a Thursday, which meant I needed to take an extra day off work. Fine. She wanted the bachelorette trip to be in Scottsdale for 4 days, which I helped plan and partly helped fund because 2 of her friends had tight budgets, and she quietly mentioned to Oliver that she hoped everyone could contribute equally. I put in an extra $600 to make up the gap. I did all of this without complaining. I want you to understand, Nat. I wasn't keeping score. I was just trying to be a good future sister-in-law, a good bridesmaid, a good presence in my brother's new chapter. And then, about 3 months before the wedding, I found out through a text message from my mother, not a call, not a conversation, a text, that Kelsey had asked Oliver to reduce the wedding party. The message said, "Kelsey's decided to simplify the ceremony. She wants it to be just her 2 closest girlfriends. Oliver wanted you to hear it from family first." That was the whole message. 23 words to tell me I'd been removed from my only brother's wedding. I read it 4 times. Then I set my phone face down on my kitchen counter and stood there looking at the window above my sink, at the city lights blurring a little through the glass, and I breathed very carefully. My mother's name was in my recent calls. I did not press it. I thought about the $47,000. I thought about the 4 days in Scottsdale. I thought about the Thursday I'd already requested off work, the dress fitting I'd already been to, the speech I'd already started writing in a notes app at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday because I'd woken up and had a line I liked and didn't want to lose it. I thought about Oliver calling me from the parking garage of that rooftop restaurant, his voice shaking. I picked up my phone. I texted my mother back 2 words. "Okay, understood." I sent the same 2 words to Oliver 20 minutes later when he finally texted me directly with a message that was mostly apologies wrapped in explanations that were really just rewrapped apologies. I didn't respond beyond those 2 words. He sent 3 more messages. I read all of them and put the phone back in my pocket. Something settled in me that night. Not rage. Not even grief exactly. Something quieter and more permanent. A door closing from the inside. I had been covering half the cost of their catering. This was something I'd offered to do 6 months prior, during a dinner where my parents and Oliver and Kelsey and I all sat around a table and talked about the wedding budget, and it became apparent very gently that the numbers weren't quite working, and I had offered, freely, without being asked, to help with catering. My contribution was going to be $11,000. I had already put down $4,000 as a partial payment to hold the caterer. The week after I received that text, I called the catering company. I explained that my contribution to this particular event was being withdrawn due to a change in circumstances, and I asked about the deposit situation. They were kind about it. I lost the $4,000. I accepted that. It was the cost of clarity. Then I sent Oliver an email. Not a text. An email, because texts disappear into the casual stream of daily life, and I wanted this to exist somewhere real. I wrote it carefully over 2 evenings. I did not write it in anger. I wrote it the way you write something you want to be true in 10 years, not just tonight. I told him that I loved him. I said that directly in the first paragraph, because it was true and I didn't want anything else I said to be read without that foundation. I told him that I had spent the better part of a decade being available to him in ways I was glad to have been, and that I did not regret any of it. I told him that being removed from his wedding party without a direct conversation through a text from her mother had hurt me in a way I wasn't able to just absorb and move past. I told him that as a result, I would not be continuing to contribute to the wedding financially. I listed, plainly, the amounts I'd contributed over the years, not as an invoice, as a record, as a way of saying, I want you to see the full picture of what this relationship has looked like from my side. I told him I wished him and Kelsey a genuinely wonderful life together. I meant it. I did not ask him to respond. I did not ask for anything. I clicked send and closed my laptop and made myself a cup of tea and watched half a documentary about coral reefs until I fell asleep on my couch. My mother called me the next morning at 7:43 a.m. I know the time because I was still in bed and I looked at my phone and let it ring. She called again at 8:02. Then my father called at 8:17. Then Oliver called at 9:05 and I picked up because he was still my brother and I had said what I needed to say and I could face a conversation now. He was upset. Not the kind of upset that sounds like anger, the kind that sounds like fear. His voice had that quality again, the shaking, but this time it wasn't the good kind. He said Kelsey was devastated. He said the caterer had called him and he hadn't understood at first what had happened. He said the wedding budget was now several $1,000s short and they didn't have a solution. I listened to all of this. I let him finish. I didn't interrupt. Then I said, I know. I'm sorry the timing created stress. I hope you find a solution that works. He said, Stella, come on. You can't do this. I said, I didn't do anything to you, Oliver. I just stopped doing things for you. That's different. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. He said, I thought we were family. And this is the part I've replayed more than any other, because my answer surprised even me in the moment. I didn't plan it. It just came out simply without heat. I said we are. But family isn't a reason to accept being an afterthought. I love you. I hope you have a beautiful wedding. I won't be there, but I'll be thinking of you. And I hung up. Gently, not dramatically, just hung up. My parents spent the next 2 weeks cycling through a series of approaches. My mother started with guilt, moved to sadness, then briefly landed on something close to anger before retreating back to sadness because it was more effective. My father, who is not a man comfortable with emotional confrontation, sent me a single text that said, "This isn't like you." I read it and thought, maybe that's the point. What I didn't expect was Kelsey. About 10 days before the wedding, she called me from a number I didn't recognize. She'd borrowed a friend's phone, she said, because she was worried I wouldn't answer hers. She was right. I answered, heard her voice, and considered hanging up. But there was something in how she started. Not with an apology exactly, but with the sentence, "I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." She told me she hadn't known about the money. Not the full picture. Oliver had let her believe his family situation was relatively normal, relatively even. She hadn't known about the school, the car, the rent deposits, the Scottsdale trip subsidy. She hadn't known about the catering contribution. She had known about the decision to reduce the wedding party. That was hers. She said she owned it, that she'd made it for reasons that felt important at the time and now felt small. She said she had asked Oliver to tell me directly, and when she found out he'd had their mother do it over text, she had been more upset than she'd let herself show. She said, "I don't expect you to come to the wedding. I'm not asking for that. I just didn't want you to think I understood what I was doing and didn't care." I sat with that for a while. Then I said, "Thank you for calling." She said, "He loves you. He's just not always brave about it." I said, "I know. That's the part that's hardest." We talked for maybe 12 more minutes about nothing in particular. She asked about Chicago, I asked about Nashville. There was an almost ordinary quality to it, like we were two people who might have been friends in different circumstances. When we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving. I didn't go to the wedding. I sent a gift. A nice one, something off the registry, wrapped and mailed with a card that said, "Wishing you both so much happiness." I meant it. Insofar as I'm able to mean good things toward people who have also hurt me. I've come to understand those two things can live in the same sentence. My mother called me the night after the wedding. I answered this time. She said it had been beautiful. She said Oliver had cried at the altar. She paused, and then she said, carefully, "He looked for you when he walked in." I don't know if that matters. I said, "It matters." She said, "We didn't handle this right, Stella." I said, "No. You didn't." Another pause. Then, "Are you okay?" And here's the thing about that question. When it finally comes from the right direction, with what feels like real curiosity behind it, it's harder to answer than you expect. Because you've been holding yourself together for weeks. Because the holding together is the thing you've been doing instead of falling apart, and someone asking sincerely makes the holding suddenly visible, and the visible thing is also a little heavier. I said, "I'm getting there." She said, "I'd like to take you to dinner when we're up in Chicago next month. Just us. If you'd be willing." I thought about it. Not long. But I didn't say yes automatically, the way I used to say yes to everything automatically. And that pause, that tiny hesitation, where I actually asked myself what I wanted before I answered, felt like something. I said, "Yes, I'd like that." Oliver texted me from his honeymoon, which I didn't expect, He was in Portugal, somewhere with blue shutters, and he sent me a photo of the water and nothing else. Just the photo. I looked at it for a long time. The water was very blue. The light in it was the kind of light that looks like forgiveness even when you're not sure what you're forgiving or whether you're ready. I didn't text back that day. I texted back the next morning just, "Beautiful. I'm glad you're happy." He replied, "We have a lot to talk about when I'm back." I said, "We do. I'll be here." And I meant that too. Not in the way I used to mean it. The kind of meaning that came with an open tab, an unlimited extension of myself, a readiness to absorb whatever was needed without limit. I meant it differently now. I'll be here as myself. As someone who loves you, but who has also drawn a line around what loving you is allowed to cost me. As your sister. Fully. Without apology, but without erasure either. The thing nobody tells you about setting a boundary with someone you love is that it doesn't feel like power. Not at first. At first it feels like loss, like standing in a room where the furniture has been rearranged and you keep reaching for things that aren't where you left them. But after a while, not long actually, maybe a few weeks, something else comes in. Quieter, more durable. The feeling that you are still there. That the outline of you is actually yours, that you did not disappear just because you stopped making yourself smaller. I still have that note in my phone, the one with the numbers. I haven't added to it in a while. I think maybe I'm done adding to it. I went for a walk the Sunday after all of this, down along the lakefront, one of those Chicago November mornings where the sky's the color of an old dime and the wind is doing what Chicago wind does. And I had my hands in my pockets and I was thinking about nothing in particular, just walking. Just being in my own body, in the middle of my own life. And I felt not happy exactly. Not relieved, not vindicated, not righteous. Just present, just mine. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. I think I'd spent so long being available to everyone around me that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be available to myself. To show up for my own life the way I showed up for theirs. To be the person I kept being for my family. Dependable, thoughtful, present, but turned inward for once, aimed at my own quiet. My brother and I are talking now, slowly. The conversations are shorter than they used to be, and they're more careful, which is maybe not a bad thing. Careful can be another word for intentional. He hasn't said everything he needs to say, and neither have I, and we both know that, and we're moving toward it at a pace that feels survivable. Kelsey sent me a message last week, a photo of a plant she'd bought for their apartment with the caption, "Trying to keep something alive. Thought of you." I sent back a laughing emoji and then, after a moment, a heart. Small things, real things. My mother and I had that dinner. She ordered the salmon and I ordered pasta, and we sat by a window and talked for almost 3 hours, and somewhere in the middle of it she said something I've been turning over ever since. She said, "I think I always believed that, because you were capable, you didn't need the same things the rest of us needed." I said, "That's not how it works." She said, "I know that now." I believed her. Not entirely, not in the way that erases history, but in the way that counts. The way where you can see a person trying to see you differently, and you decide to let that be real, provisionally, because love is also a practice, and practices take time. I drove home from that dinner, through the city, the lights going past in the way they do at night, smearing a little through the windshield, and I thought about Kelsey's blue shutters and my mother's salmon and my brother's shaking voice, the good kind and the bad kind. And I thought about the number in my notes app that I haven't opened in a while, and I thought, this is what it feels like to stop disappearing. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just quiet and mine and enough. Have you ever been the person everyone leans on until the moment you stop leaning back? I'd really like to know, because I think there are a lot of us out there. And I think most of us have never said it out loud. I thought a lot about why I kept saying yes for so long. Not just to Oliver, but to all of it. The small asks that became large ones. The emergencies that arrived on a schedule. The way my family learned to read my reliability as an unlimited resource rather than a choice I was making freely. And I think the honest answer is that I confused being needed with being loved. Those two things can look identical from the inside, especially when you're the capable one, the one who figures things out, the one who picks up the phone. What I understand now, and it took losing my place at my brother's wedding to understand it, is that being capable is not the same as being obligated. I was never obligated. I chose, every single time, and those choices were real and they were mine. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself whether I was choosing freely or choosing because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. Afraid of being seen as selfish. Afraid of being the one who let the family down. Afraid that if I stopped holding everything up, something would collapse and that would somehow be my fault. The night I typed, "Okay, understood," back to my mother, I wasn't making a power move. I wasn't plotting. I was just, finally, telling the truth. The truth was that something in me had reached its limit, and when you reach that limit with any kind of integrity, you stop pretending you haven't. What followed was hard in ways I didn't anticipate. The calls, I didn't answer. The emails I rewrote 4 times to make sure they were honest without being cruel. The $4,000 deposit I walked away from because it was the price of being clear. None of that felt like winning. It felt like grief, mostly. The specific grief of realizing that a relationship you thought was one thing was actually something else. But here's what I've come to believe about cause and effect. Stripped of any framework except the plainest human one, the things we accept teach people what they can offer us. Not because people are calculating, Oliver wasn't calculating, I know that, but because we are all, constantly, learning what is acceptable from the feedback we receive. I had been teaching my family for a decade that my yes was automatic, that my support was structural, like a wall, not something I was actively choosing. When I stopped, they were genuinely shocked, and that shock was its own kind of answer. The truer version of strength, I've learned, is not the kind that keeps absorbing without limit. It's the kind that stays honest about what it can carry. It's Kelsey calling from a borrowed phone to say I should have done this differently. It's Oliver sending me a photo of blue water from his honeymoon because he didn't have the words but wanted me to know he was thinking of me. It's my mother ordering salmon and sitting across from me for 3 hours and saying, "I think I always believed that. Because you were capable, you didn't need the same things." Those moments didn't erase what happened, but they were real. And real is what I'm choosing now. Real relationships, real limits, real love that doesn't require me to disappear inside it. Stella is still here. That part matters most.